The terminal clock showed 11:47 p.m. when Amora Williams adjusted the strap of her carry-on bag for the third time, her 6-year-old son Marcus sleeping against her shoulder. She'd been traveling for 14 hours already, connecting through 3 airports, and this final red-eye flight to London was supposed to be the easy part. The part where she could finally relax, close her eyes, and wake up in her husband Richard's arms. She had no idea that in exactly 2 hours and 13 minutes, her life would become international news. Amora shifted Marcus gently, his small arms instinctively wrapping tighter around her neck. The boarding announcement echoed through the nearly empty terminal. Flight 447. Direct service to London Heathrow. First class and priority boarding now beginning. She looked down at their economy tickets, row 23, seats D and E, and waited patiently as the premium passengers filed past. A woman in a crisp navy uniform caught her eye at the gate. Senior flight attendant Clara Morrison, though Amora didn't know her name yet, stood with perfect posture, scanning each boarding pass with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. When Amora finally approached the gate, something shifted in Clara's expression. It was subtle, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a tightening of the lips, but Amora had seen that look before. She'd seen it in department stores when sales associates suddenly became very interested in whether she was actually going to buy something. She'd seen it at Marcus's previous school when certain parents questioned whether she belonged at the PTA fundraiser. She'd seen it enough times to recognize it instantly, even at midnight in an airport 10,000 miles from home. Ticket, Clara said curtly, not good evening or welcome aboard like she'd said to the passenger before. Amora handed over their boarding passes, shifting Marcus's weight as his head lolled sleepily. Clara examined the tickets as if searching for forgery, then thrust them back without a word. No smile. No enjoy your flight. Just a dismissive gesture toward the jet bridge. The plane was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, less than 2 years old, with the distinctive livery of Meridian Airlines, a company that prided itself on excellence in every journey. What passengers didn't know, what even most employees didn't know, was that the majority shareholder and effective owner of Meridian Airlines preferred to remain anonymous. Richard Williams had built his fortune quietly, strategically, and he'd learned that the best way to understand your business was to observe it when nobody knew you were watching. Amora found their seats, middle section, economy class. She'd specifically chosen these seats because the middle row meant Marcus could lie across her lap without disturbing other passengers if he got restless. She was always thinking of others, always trying to minimize any inconvenience her presence might cause. It was exhausting, this constant calculation of how to exist without taking up too much space, without drawing too much attention. As she settled Marcus into his seat, carefully buckling his seatbelt while he mumbled sleepily about wanting his dinosaur book, Clara appeared in the aisle. She was conducting the routine visual check of passengers, but when she reached row 23, she paused. That bag needs to go in the overhead compartment, Clara said, pointing at Amora's personal item tucked carefully under the seat in front of her. Oh, I believe this meets the personal item dimensions, Amora replied politely. It fits completely under the seat. Clara's jaw tightened. I said it needs to go overhead. Amora looked around. At least 6 other passengers in nearby rows had similar-sized bags in the exact same position. A businessman in 22C had an even larger briefcase protruding slightly into the aisle. Clara hadn't said a word to any of them. Of course, Amora said quietly, not wanting to create a scene. She stood, retrieved the bag, and placed it in the overhead bin. When she sat back down, Marcus stirred, whimpering slightly. Mommy, I'm cold, he murmured, his little body shivering in the aggressive air conditioning that always seemed to blast at full force during boarding. I'll get you a blanket, sweetheart, Amora promised, catching Clara's eye as the flight attendant moved back up the aisle. Excuse me, could we please have a blanket? My son is quite cold. Clara didn't even turn around. She kept walking as if Amora hadn't spoken at all. The flight continued boarding. Passengers streamed past, business travelers, families, a group of college students heading to study abroad. The businessman in 22C flagged Clara down and asked for a pre-departure water. She fetched it immediately with a warm smile. A woman in 24A requested a blanket for her husband. Clara retrieved it within 30 seconds. But when Amora tried again, "Excuse me, miss, about that blanket." Clara's response was sharp and immediate. "We'll distribute amenities after takeoff. You need to be patient." Patient. Amora had been patient her entire life. Patient when teachers assumed she was Marcus's nanny at school pickup. Patient when people expressed surprise that she could afford things. Patient when they asked to touch her hair, questioned her credentials, or assumed she was the help at her own events. She could be patient a little longer. The plane pushed back from the gate at 12:23 a.m. Marcus was now fully awake, pressing his face against the window to watch the airport lights streak past. His little body shook with cold, and Amora wrapped her arms around him, trying to share her warmth. She noticed Clara distributing blankets in first class, then business class. When the seatbelt sign turned off, she watched Clara hand blankets to passengers in rows 20, 21, and 22. Then Clara walked right past row 23 without a glance. "Miss?" Amora called out, her voice still carefully modulated, still polite. "We've been waiting for a blanket. My son is very cold." Clara stopped, turned slowly, and the look on her face was pure disdain. "I told you to wait. But you just gave blankets to. Are you questioning how I do my job?" Clara's voice rose slightly, enough for nearby passengers to turn and look. "No, I'm simply asking for a blanket for my child. He's 6 years old and he's freezing." Clara stepped closer, and what happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms, news channels, and documentary footage. But in that moment, it was just two women in an airplane aisle, one holding all the power, the other just trying to keep her child warm. "You people," Clara said, her voice dripping with contempt, "always think you're entitled to special treatment." The words hung in the air. You people. Every person of color within earshot knew exactly what that meant. The white passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to hear, others watching with growing alarm. Amora stood up slowly, carefully, Marcus clinging to her side. "What exactly do you mean by you people?" It was then that Clara made the decision that would end her career, result in criminal charges, and spark a global conversation about discrimination at 35,000 feet. She reached out, grabbed Amora's arm with her left hand, and with her right, slapped her across the face. The sound was like a gunshot in the confined space of the aircraft cabin. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if the entire plane had been frozen in time, 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, suspended between disbelief and horror. Marcus screamed, not just a cry, but a primal, terrified scream that would haunt every passenger on that flight for years to come. "Mommy!" Amora's hand went to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. She'd been discriminated against before, marginalized, dismissed, ignored. But never in her 34 years of life had anyone laid a hand on her. Not like this. Not in front of her child. Not with such casual cruelty. The spell broke when a passenger in 25B, later identified as James Chen, a tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, raised his phone and said loudly, "I got all of that on video." Suddenly, phones appeared everywhere. The modern instinct to document, to witness, to ensure that this moment wouldn't be dismissed or denied later. Clara's eyes went wide as she realized what was happening. She took a step back, her hand still raised, as if only now comprehending what she'd done. "She assaulted me," Clara said quickly, her voice pitching higher. "You all saw it. She grabbed me first." But the passengers had seen no such thing. What they had seen was a mother asking for a blanket and a flight attendant responding with violence. "That's a lie." The voice came from 23A, an elderly woman named Dorothy Walsh who would later testify in court. "That young mother never touched you. You attacked her unprovoked." The cabin erupted. Passengers were on their feet, voices raised in outrage. "Call the captain," someone shouted. "This is assault," another voice added. "She needs to be arrested." Clara backed away down the aisle, but there was nowhere to go on an airplane at cruising altitude. She pressed the call button for the cockpit, trying to reach Captain Harrison, but her hands were shaking. Meanwhile, Amora had sunk back into her seat, holding Marcus tight against her chest, his body trembling with sobs. "It's okay, baby," She whispered into his hair, though nothing about this was okay. "Mommy's fine. Everything's going to be fine." But everything was not fine, and in a glass-walled office building 4,000 miles away in London, an alert was already flashing on Richard Williams's computer screen. Richard had been working late, as he often did, monitoring Meridian Airlines operations from his private office. He'd built this system specifically to track any incidents in real time: delays, mechanical issues, customer complaints. He believed in keeping his finger on the pulse of his company, even if most employees had no idea who he really was. The alert read, "Urgent, passenger disturbance on Flight 447. Physical altercation reported." His first thought was routine, probably another case of too much alcohol and not enough sense. But then a second alert popped up: multiple passenger reports, crew member assault on customer. Richard frowned, pulling up the flight manifest. His blood went cold when he saw the passenger list for row 23. Amora Williams. Marcus Williams. His wife. His son. His personal phone buzzed. A WhatsApp message from James Chen, whom Richard knew through various Silicon Valley connections, though James had no idea Richard owned Meridian Airlines. The message contained a video file and 4 words: "Is this your wife?" Richard's hands trembled as he opened the video. The image was crystal clear, the audio unmistakable. He watched Clara's hand connect with Amora's face. He heard his son scream. He saw his wife, his brilliant, patient, endlessly tolerant wife, standing there in shock while a Meridian Airlines employee assaulted her. The office seemed to tilt. Richard had dealt with corporate crises before: hostile takeovers, labor disputes, mechanical failures that grounded entire fleets. But this was different. This was personal. This was his family. He picked up his secure phone and dialed Captain Harrison directly. The pilots of Meridian Airlines didn't know who Richard really was, but they knew that when a call came from this particular number, with this particular authorization code, it was to be obeyed without question. "Captain Harrison," the voice was professional, calm despite the chaos Richard could hear in the background. "Captain, this is Alpha Priority Override," Richard said, using the code that indicated the highest level of corporate emergency. "I need you to listen very carefully." Back in the cabin, Clara was attempting damage control. She'd retreated to the galley, where 2 junior flight attendants, Sarah and Michael, stood frozen, unsure what to do. They'd seen Clara's behavior escalate throughout the flight, had witnessed her targeting Amora from the moment she boarded, but neither had expected this. "She attacked me," Clara insisted, though even she didn't sound convinced anymore. "These people, they always cause problems. You know how they are." Sarah, who was only 23 and on her 5th international flight, found her voice. "Clara, I saw what happened. You hit her. Unprovoked. In front of her child. Whose side are you on?" Clara snapped. "The side that doesn't want to go to prison for being an accomplice to assault," Michael said quietly. The intercom crackled to life. Captain Harrison's voice filled the cabin, unusually grave. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Due to a serious security incident, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Reykjavik, Iceland. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Law enforcement will be meeting the aircraft upon arrival." Clara's face went white. "Reykjavik? We're diverting for this." She had no idea that at that very moment, Richard Williams was orchestrating the fastest emergency response in Meridian Airlines history. He'd already contacted the head of security at Keflavik International Airport. He'd authorized unlimited funds for passenger accommodation during the delay. He'd even arranged for a child psychologist to meet the plane, specifically to help Marcus process what he'd witnessed. But more than that, Richard was personally rerouting his own jet to Iceland. He would be there when the plane landed. Clara Morrison was about to meet the owner of Meridian Airlines, and she had no idea it would be the husband of the woman she'd just assaulted. The descent into Reykjavik was unlike anything the passengers of Flight 447 had experienced. Usually, an unscheduled landing meant mechanical issues or medical emergencies, things that created tension but also unity among passengers. This was different. This was a plane divided. Half the passengers surrounded Amora and Marcus protectively, offering support, sharing their contact information for witness statements. The other half watched Clara with barely disguised contempt as she paced the galley, her career unraveling at 500 miles per hour. James Chen had uploaded the video to his cloud storage and sent it to 3 different news outlets with the message, Meridian Airlines flight attendant assaults black mother for asking for a blanket. By the time Flight 447 touched down in Reykjavik, the video had been viewed 47,000 times. By the time the plane reached the gate, it had hit 500,000. Amora didn't know about any of this. She was focused entirely on Marcus, who hadn't let go of her since the incident. His little fingers were twisted in her blouse, his face buried against her shoulder. She could feel him trembling, could hear his occasional whimpers. 6 years old. Her baby was 6 years old and had just watched his mother be attacked by someone who was supposed to keep them safe. "Mommy," Marcus whispered, "why did that lady hit you?" How do you explain hatred to a 6-year-old? How do you tell them that some people will look at their skin and see something threatening, something less than, something that doesn't deserve basic human dignity? Amora had hoped to have a few more years before this conversation, a few more years of innocence. Sometimes, sweetheart, people make very bad choices. What she did was wrong, and she's going to have to face consequences for it. Is she going to time out? Marcus asked with the sincere logic of a first grader. Something like that, baby. A grown-up timeout. The plane came to a stop at a remote stand, away from the main terminal. Through the window, Amora could see an unusual amount of activity: police cars, security vehicles, and a set of mobile stairs being positioned at both the front and rear doors of the aircraft. This wasn't standard procedure for a regular diversion. Captain Harrison's voice returned to the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Law enforcement officers will be boarding the aircraft shortly. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your patience during this situation." Clara had stopped pacing. She stood in the galley, gripping the counter, her knuckles white. Sarah and Michael had moved away from her, physically distancing themselves from whatever was about to happen. The aircraft door opened, and the sound of footsteps, heavy, authoritative, filled the front cabin. 3 Icelandic police officers entered, followed by 2 officials from Meridian Airlines that nobody recognized. They were actually Richard's personal security team, but they wore generic airline credentials. They moved directly to the galley. "Clara Morrison," the lead officer asked. "This is a misunderstanding," Clara started. "The passenger was aggressive, she..." Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The click of handcuffs echoed through the cabin. Several passengers applauded, a spontaneous reaction that would later be debated on social media as either justice or mob mentality. Clara was led toward the front exit, but as she passed row 23, she turned to look at Amora one more time. There was no apology in her eyes, just resentment. Even now, even caught, even facing arrest, she still felt she was the victim. After Clara was removed, one of the Meridian officials approached Amora. "Mrs. Williams? We've arranged for you and your son to deplane first. There's a private lounge waiting for you, and we've arranged for medical attention if needed." Amora was confused by the level of service, the deference in the man's voice. This wasn't how airlines typically treated economy passengers, even ones who'd been assaulted by crew members. But she was too exhausted to question it. She gathered Marcus and their belongings and followed the official off the plane. The lounge was unlike anything in the public terminal. Plush chairs, soft lighting, toys already set out for Marcus, including several dinosaur figures that made his eyes light up despite everything. A doctor was waiting, gentle and patient, checking Amora's face where Clara had struck her, documenting the red mark that was already beginning to bruise. "Mommy's okay," Amora kept telling Marcus, though the doctor's photography suggested this was more serious than she was letting on. It was then that the door opened again, and Amora's world tilted on its axis. "Richard!" Richard Williams stood in the doorway, his face a masterclass in controlled fury. He was supposed to be in London, in meetings, preparing for the quarterly board review. Instead, he was here, in Iceland, still wearing his business suit but looking like he'd aged 5 years in the last 2 hours. "Daddy!" Marcus broke free from Amora's arms and ran to his father, who scooped him up, holding him tight. "Hey, buddy. I heard you were very brave. You took care of Mommy." Marcus nodded solemnly. A mean lady hit mommy. But I didn't let go. I held on tight just like you said, when someone's scared, you hold on tight. Richard's eyes met Amora's over Marcus's head, and she saw something she'd rarely seen in her husband's eyes, rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. You did perfect, buddy. You did exactly right. He walked over to Amora, still carrying Marcus, and with his free hand, gently touched her face where the bruise was forming. I'm so sorry. This never should have happened. How are you here? Amora asked, confusion breaking through her shock. Richard set Marcus down with the dinosaur toys and guided Amora to a corner where they could speak privately. I need to tell you something. I should have told you a long time ago, but I wanted to know the company from the ground up, to understand it without the filter that comes with being the owner. The owner? Richard, what are you talking about? Meridian Airlines. I own it. I'm not just a board member or a minority shareholder. I own 58% of the company. I am Meridian Airlines. Amora sank into a chair. The VIP treatment, the immediate diversion, the police response, it all made sense now. You own the airline where I just got slapped by a flight attendant? Yes. And that flight attendant is about to discover what happens when you assault the owner's wife. Before you think this is just about revenge or privilege, I want you to subscribe to hear more stories where justice prevails and ordinary people stand up against discrimination. Hit that subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story. But Richard's next words surprised Amora. This isn't just about us. When I saw that video, yes, I saw my wife being attacked. But I also saw every black mother who's been dismissed, every person of color who's been told they are difficult for asking for basic service, every child who's watched their parent be humiliated by someone in authority. This ends now. Not just for us, but for everyone. Meanwhile, Clara Morrison sat in a holding room at the Reykjavik police station, still in her Meridian Airlines uniform, though her wings had been confiscated along with her employee ID. She'd been read her rights in English, offered a phone call, which she'd used to contact a lawyer in London who told her to say nothing until he could arrange representation in Iceland. She still didn't understand how everything had escalated so quickly. In her mind, she was just maintaining order, dealing with a difficult passenger. The fact that she'd only found Amora difficult, that she'd served everyone else with a smile, didn't register as discrimination to her. It was just the way things were. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A man in an expensive suit entered, not her lawyer, but someone with an air of authority that made her sit up straighter. Ms. Morrison, I'm Thomas Clark, Chief Legal Counsel for Meridian Airlines. I'm here to inform you that your employment has been terminated effective immediately. You can't fire me without a hearing. I have union protection, I have. You physically assaulted a passenger. On video. The incident has been viewed over 3 million times in the last 4 hours. You've exposed the company to massive liability, violated multiple aviation regulations, and committed a criminal act while representing Meridian Airlines. Your union has already indicated they will not be defending you in this matter. Clara's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. 3 million views? How was that possible? Furthermore, Thomas continued, the passenger you assaulted has indicated they will be pressing full criminal charges. Given that this occurred in international airspace and landed in Iceland, you're looking at a complex jurisdictional case that will likely result in charges in multiple countries. I want to speak to the owner, Clara demanded. I've been with this airline for 15 years. I deserve to explain myself to the person making these decisions. Thomas paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. The owner? You want to speak to Mr. Williams? Yes, Mr. Williams. Maybe he'll understand that this is all being blown out of proportion. Very well. He's actually here in Reykjavik. He flew in specifically to deal with this situation. I'll see if he's willing to meet with you. An hour later, Clara was escorted to a conference room in the police station. She'd rehearsed her speech, how Amora had been demanding, how she'd felt threatened, how 15 years of exemplary service should count for something. She was prepared to grovel if necessary, to promise diversity training, anger management, whatever it took to salvage her career. The door opened, and Clara stood, ready to make her case. But it wasn't who she expected. It was Amora Williams, and behind her, a man Clara recognized from the Meridian Airlines annual report she'd never bothered to read closely, Richard Williams, CEO and majority owner. The blood drained from Clara's face as the pieces clicked into place. The woman she'd slapped, the difficult passenger she'd targeted from the moment she'd boarded, was married to the man who owned the airline. "Ms. Morrison," Richard said, his voice deadly calm. "I believe you wanted to explain yourself to the owner?" Clara's legs gave out. She collapsed back into her chair, the full weight of what she'd done crashing down on her. She'd not only assaulted a passenger, she'd assaulted the owner's wife, in front of the owner's son, while representing the owner's company. I didn't know," she stammered. "That's exactly the point," Amora spoke for the first time. "You didn't know who I was, so you felt comfortable treating me that way. How many other black mothers have you dismissed? How many other children have watched you humiliate their parents? How many times have you decided someone wasn't worthy of basic human dignity because of how they looked?" Clara had no answer. In truth, she'd never thought about it. The subtle discriminations, the small acts of prejudice, they'd been so ingrained in her behavior that she'd never recognized them for what they were. Until now. Until they'd culminated in an act so egregious that it couldn't be explained away. "Your actions represent everything wrong with how people of color are treated in service industries," Richard said. "You had power, minimal as it was, and you used it to humiliate someone you saw as beneath you. But here's what you didn't count on. Every passenger on that plane had a camera. Every one of them could become a witness. The world is watching, Ms. Morrison, and they are disgusted by what they see." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You're terminated, obviously. You'll be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Meridian Airlines will cooperate completely with all investigations. But more than that, your actions have sparked a complete review of our hiring practices, our training procedures, and our corporate culture. You've become the catalyst for change, just not the kind you ever intended." Clara found her voice, weak as it was. "It wasn't about race. I'm not a racist." Amora laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You grabbed me and slapped me for asking for a blanket. You ignored me while serving everyone else. You called me you people. If that's not racism, what would you call it?" "I call it Tuesday," a voice said from the doorway. Captain Harrison had entered the room, still in his pilot's uniform. "I've filed my report with the aviation authorities. In 15 years of flying, I've never seen such blatant discrimination. I've also submitted my own complaint about how ground crew and flight attendants have treated passengers of color on my flights. This ends now." Clara looked around the room, at the black woman she'd assaulted, at the CEO she'd humiliated, at the captain whose respect she'd lost, and realized there was no explanation that would save her. No excuse that would minimize what she'd done. "I'm sorry," she said finally, though the words felt hollow even to her. "No," Amora said firmly. "You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry there were consequences. But you're not sorry for what you did, because in your mind, you still don't think you did anything wrong. That's the problem, Ms. Morrison. That's what needs to change." Richard stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Your personal belongings from the aircraft will be forwarded to your home address. Your final paycheck will reflect hours worked up until the moment you assaulted my wife. Any legal defense is your own responsibility. Meridian Airlines will be pursuing civil damages for the harm you've caused to our reputation." As they turned to leave, Clara called out desperately, "What am I supposed to do now?" Amora turned back, Marcus's dinosaur toy still clutched in her hand. She'd been holding it the entire time, drawing strength from the reminder of what mattered. "Maybe use this time to reflect on who you are when you think no one important is watching. Because that's who you really are." The story could have ended there, with Clara facing justice, with Richard using his power to protect his family, with Amora returning home with a story of survival. But that's not how change happens. Change happens when individual incidents become movements, when personal pain transforms into collective action. Within 24 hours, the video had been viewed 50 million times. #Justice for Amora was trending globally. But more importantly, other stories started emerging. Flight attendants who'd witnessed discrimination but been afraid to speak up. Passengers who'd been treated like second-class citizens because of their skin color, their accent, their appearance. The dam had broken, and the flood was overwhelming. Meridian Airlines stock dropped 12% in 2 days. Richard could have done damage control, could have minimized the incident, protected the company's value. Instead, he did something unprecedented in corporate history. He went fully transparent. He released a statement, not as a press release, but as a personal video, sitting next to Amora and Marcus. What happened on Flight 447 was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper problem, not just at Meridian Airlines, but in our society. We've allowed subtle discrimination to flourish under the guise of customer service standards. We've turned a blind eye when certain passengers receive different treatment. That ends now. He announced a comprehensive reform package, mandatory anti-discrimination training for all employees, not the checkbox kind, but intensive, ongoing education. A zero-tolerance policy for discrimination with immediate termination and legal prosecution. A passenger advocate program where anyone experiencing discrimination could report directly to an independent board. And most importantly, a complete review of hiring practices to ensure diversity at every level of the organization. But this isn't just about policies, Amora added in the video, Marcus sitting on her lap, playing with his dinosaurs but listening. This is about remembering that every passenger is someone's parent, someone's child, someone's loved one. They deserve dignity, respect, and kindness, not because of who they might be married to, but because they are human. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Other airlines scrambled to announce their own reform programs. The International Air Transport Association called an emergency meeting to address industry-wide discrimination. Clara Morrison's slap had been heard around the world. But what about Clara herself? She stood trial in Iceland 3 months later. The prosecution's case was straightforward: video evidence, multiple witnesses, clear documentation of assault. Her defense attorney tried to argue for leniency, citing her previously clean record, the stress of the job, the late hour. But prosecutor Erickson dismantled each excuse methodically. Ms. Morrison selected her victim, he argued. From the moment Mrs. Williams boarded that aircraft, she was targeted. Not because of anything she did, but because of who she was. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was the culmination of systematic discrimination that finally went too far. Clara was found guilty of assault and sentenced to 6 months in prison, followed by 2 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay substantial damages to Amora and banned from working in any customer service capacity for 5 years. But perhaps the worst punishment was the public shame. Her name became synonymous with discrimination. Her face, frozen in that moment of impact, became a meme representing everything wrong with prejudice in positions of power. What question do you have about discrimination you've witnessed or experienced? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters and could help others speak up too. During the trial, something unexpected happened. Sarah, the junior flight attendant who'd witnessed everything, testified not just about that night, but about the culture Clara had created on flights. She would categorize passengers the moment they boarded, Sarah testified. She had codes she'd use with other crew members. Difficult meant black. High maintenance meant Middle Eastern. Needy meant Hispanic. We all knew what she meant, but nobody said anything because she was senior crew. She controlled our schedules, our routes, our evaluations. This revelation sparked another investigation. It turned out Clara had been the subject of 12 passenger complaints over 5 years, all from passengers of color, all dismissed as misunderstandings or customer service issues. The pattern had been there all along, documented but ignored. Michael, the other flight attendant, came forward with his own story. "I'm gay," he told the court. "Clara made my life hell for 2 years when she found out. Little comments, schedule changes that made my life difficult, always watching for any mistake. I was planning to quit after this flight. What she did to Mrs. Williams, I'd seen her building to something like that for months." The trial became about more than one slap. It became an examination of how discrimination flourishes when good people stay silent, when institutions prioritize smooth operations over justice, when those with even small amounts of power use it to demean others. Richard used his platform to push for industry-wide change. He testified before the Congressional Committee on Transportation about the need for federal oversight of discrimination in aviation. He funded a study that revealed 43% of passengers of color had experienced some form of discrimination while flying, from seat assignments to service quality to security screening. But it was Amora who became the unexpected voice of the movement. She could have retreated, taken the settlement money, and moved on. Instead, she founded the Dignity in Transit Foundation, dedicated to training customer service representatives in inclusive service and supporting victims of discrimination in transportation settings. "People ask me if I'm glad Clara hit me," Amora said in one interview, Marcus playing in the background. "Of course not. No one should experience what I experienced. But if my pain can prevent another mother from being humiliated in front of her child, if Marcus witnessing that leads to him standing up against discrimination his whole life, then something good will have come from something terrible." Marcus, now in therapy to process what he'd witnessed, had his own perspective. With the simple wisdom of a child, he told his therapist, "The mean lady thought mommy wasn't important. But everybody's important. That's what mommy says. Even the mean lady is important, but she forgot that other people are important too." 6 months after the incident, Meridian Airlines released their diversity report. Employment of people of color had increased by 37%. Customer satisfaction scores from minority passengers had risen by 52%. Discrimination complaints had dropped to near zero. The Clara Morrison effect, as business schools would later call it, proved that addressing discrimination wasn't just morally right, it was good business. Other flight attendants began reaching out to Amora with their stories. Not just victims, but witnesses, bystanders who wished they'd spoken up. A veteran flight attendant named Patricia wrote, "I've been flying for 30 years. I've seen discrimination so often it became background noise. Your story made me realize I've been complicit through my silence. I'm speaking up now. Every time." The ripple effects continued. A group of flight attendants formed the Alliance for Inclusive Skies, dedicated to calling out discrimination in real time. They developed a discrete signal system. If a crew member witnessed discrimination, they could alert others who would intervene, document, and report. No more suffering in silence. No more looking the other way. Clara, serving her sentence in a minimum security facility in Iceland, was required to attend diversity education as part of her rehabilitation. Her instructor, Dr. Ingvar Johansson, later described her journey. "She came in defiant, insisting she wasn't racist. It took 3 months for her to understand that racism isn't just burning crosses and using slurs. It's the accumulated weight of small decisions about who deserves kindness and who doesn't." Clara wrote a letter to Amora. Not the court-ordered apology she'd been required to submit, but a personal letter. Amora shared it, with Clara's permission, as part of a documentary about the incident. "Mrs. Williams, I've had 6 months to think about that night. 6 months to understand that I've spent my entire career deciding who deserved good service based on assumptions I didn't even know I was making. You asked me how many other mothers I'd dismissed, how many other children had watched me humiliate their parents. The answer is, too many. Far too many. I can't undo what I did to you and Marcus. But I want you to know that I finally understand why what I did was violent, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. I broke something in your son that night, his belief that the world would treat his mother with the respect she deserves. I'm sorry for that most of all." Amora's response was characteristically gracious but firm. "I appreciate Clara's reflection and growth. But apologies don't erase impact. Marcus still has nightmares. He still flinches when flight attendants approach us. That's the real cost of discrimination, the lasting trauma it inflicts on innocent souls." The documentary, titled Row 23, A Slap Heard Round the World, won 3 Emmy Awards and was required viewing for all aviation industry employees worldwide. It featured interviews with the passengers from Flight 447, many of whom had been profoundly changed by what they witnessed. James Chen, the tech entrepreneur who'd filmed the assault, used his platform to develop an app called Witness that made it easier to document discrimination while protecting the privacy of victims. "We all have cameras now," he said. "We all have the power to ensure that discrimination doesn't happen in darkness anymore." Dorothy Walsh, the elderly woman who'd first defended Amora, became an unlikely social media sensation at 78 years old. Her TikTok account, Grandma Against Hate, gained 2 million followers as she shared stories of standing up to discrimination throughout her life. "I was on those freedom rides in 1961, she said. "I thought we'd solve this by now. Clearly, the work isn't done." A year after the incident, Flight 447 held a reunion. Not officially, it was organized by the passengers themselves. They met in London, at a hotel not far from Heathrow. 43 of the 60 passengers attended, including Amora and Richard. Clara, still serving probation, was not invited, though she sent a letter that was read aloud. The reunion was emotional. Passengers shared how the incident had changed them. A businessman admitted he'd never noticed discrimination before because it never affected him. A young couple said they'd started speaking up when they saw injustice, crediting Amora's dignity in the face of abuse as their inspiration. A mother traveling with her own children said she taught them about the incident, about standing up for others, about not being bystanders to injustice. Captain Harrison, who'd retired early after the incident, attended as well. "In 30 years of flying, I'd never diverted a flight for passenger assault. The fact that it was my crew member doing the assaulting, it broke something in me. It made me realize how many times I'd ignored smaller incidents, dismissed passenger complaints, chosen the easy path of not getting involved." The most powerful moment came when Marcus, now 7 and more confident, stood up to speak. Amora hadn't known he was planning this, and her hand flew to her mouth as her son walked to the front of the room. "My therapist says I should talk about my feelings," Marcus began, his small voice carrying surprising strength. "I was scared when the mean lady hit my mommy. But I'm not scared anymore. Because all of you stood up for us. You didn't just watch. You helped. And now I know that there are more good people than mean people. So thank you for protecting my mommy when she needed help." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. These strangers, united by 30 seconds of violence at 35,000 feet, had become a community of conscience. They discovered that ordinary people could do extraordinary things simply by refusing to remain silent. 2 years after the incident, the aviation industry looked markedly different. The Meridian Standard, as Richard's reforms came to be known, had been adopted by every major airline. Discrimination complaints had dropped by 78% industry-wide. More importantly, the culture had shifted. It was no longer acceptable to look the other way. Passengers knew they had power. Crew members knew they had accountability. Clara completed her sentence and her probation. She now works with the Dignity in Transit Foundation, Amora's organization, speaking to customer service representatives about unconscious bias. It's painful work, facing rooms full of people who know what she did, but she does it anyway. "I'm the cautionary tale," she tells each group. "I'm what happens when you let prejudice guide your actions. I destroyed my career, traumatized a child, and became the face of discrimination, all because I thought some people deserved less than others. Don't be me." The relationship between Clara and Amora remains complex. They're not friends, some wounds don't heal that way. But they found a working relationship built on the shared goal of ensuring no other child watches their mother be assaulted for the crime of asking for a blanket. Marcus, now thriving in 2nd grade, wrote an essay about heroes for school. He wrote about his mother, of course, but also about the passengers of Flight 447. "Heroes don't always wear capes," he wrote in his careful 7-year-old handwriting. "Sometimes they just hold up phones and say that's not right. Sometimes they're grandmas who speak up. Sometimes they're captains who land planes to keep people safe. Heroes are people who help when someone needs it." Richard's handling of the crisis became a Harvard Business School case study, Leadership in Crisis, the Meridian Airlines response. But he dismisses the accolades. Any decent human being would have done the same. "The fact that my response is considered exceptional says more about how low our standards have fallen than about anything special I did." The financial impact on Meridian Airlines was significant initially. the stock drop, the settlements, the cost of reforms. But within 18 months, the airline was outperforming all competitors. It turns out that when people feel safe and respected, they become loyal customers. When employees feel proud of their company's values, they perform better. Doing right had proved profitable. The legal ramifications continued for years. Clara's case set precedents for prosecuting discrimination in international airspace. The passenger videos were admitted as evidence in multiple jurisdictions, establishing the power of citizen documentation. Aviation law was rewritten to provide stronger protections for passengers and clearer consequences for crew members who abuse their authority. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the thousands of people who heard the story and examined their own behavior. Teachers who realized they'd been calling on certain students less. Doctors who recognized they'd been dismissing certain patients' pain. Service workers who acknowledged they'd been providing different levels of service based on assumptions. The Dignity in Transit Foundation received letters from around the world. A hotel manager in Tokyo wrote about implementing new training after realizing his staff had been treating Western guests better than Asian ones. A restaurant owner in Paris admitted she'd been seating black customers in the back without consciously realizing it. A bus driver in Mumbai shared how he'd started treating migrant workers with the same respect he showed to office workers. This is the ripple effect of one slap, not just the immediate waves of outrage and justice, but the deeper currents of change that flow through society when we're forced to confront uncomfortable truths. 5 years later, Amora published a book about the experience, Row 23, Finding Grace at 35,000 Feet. It became a bestseller, but more importantly, it became required reading in customer service training programs worldwide. She donated all proceeds to programs supporting victims of discrimination. In the book's dedication, she wrote, "To Marcus, who held on tight when mommy was scared. To the passengers of Flight 447, who stood up when it mattered. To Richard, who used his power for justice. And even to Clara, who has shown that people can change if they are willing to do the hard work of confronting their own prejudice." The book tour brought Amora face to face with thousands of people who'd experienced similar discrimination but hadn't had the platform or the proof to fight back. She listened to their stories, validated their experiences, and helped them understand that what happened to them was real, was wrong, and wasn't their fault. At one book signing, a young black mother approached with her daughter. "I was on a flight last month," she said, tears in her eyes. "The flight attendant tried to move me from my paid seat to accommodate a white family who wanted to sit together. I thought of you. I thought of Marcus watching you. I stood my ground. The other passengers supported me. The flight attendant apologized. Your story gave me courage." These moments, multiplied by thousands, were the true victory. Not just that Clara faced justice, but that her actions had awakened a collective consciousness about discrimination in everyday spaces. Marcus, now 10, speaks at schools about bullying and standing up for others. He always starts the same way. "When I was 6, I learned that adults can be bullies too. But I also learned that good people outnumber bad people. We just have to be brave enough to speak up." He's developed a program called Dinosaur Defenders, referencing his beloved toys from that night, teaching kids to recognize discrimination and safely intervene or get adult help. The program has been implemented in over 300 schools across 12 countries. The 10th anniversary of the incident approaches. Flight 447 has become aviation's most famous flight number. Meridian Airlines retired it out of respect. Row 23 on all Meridian aircraft now bears a small plaque, "A Seat for Dignity," in memory of a moment that changed us all. Clara, now 53, continues her work in anti-discrimination education. She's never returned to aviation, her ban has been lifted, but she says she hasn't earned that privilege back. She works as a diversity consultant, using her story as a teaching tool. She's married now, to a man who knew her story before they met and saw in her someone genuinely trying to atone. "I can't undo that slap," she says in every presentation. "But I can spend the rest of my life making sure others don't make my mistake. I can teach people to recognize the Clara in themselves, the part that makes snap judgments, that treats some people as less deserving, and consciously choose to be better." The transformation hasn't been easy. Clara receives death threats still, 5 years later. Her children, She has two now, will grow up knowing what their mother did. But she faces it all with a determination to use her infamy for good. Amora and Richard have used their platform to push for broader social justice reforms. The incident opened doors to conversations about discrimination in healthcare, education, housing, and criminal justice. They've testified before Congress 6 times, met with 3 presidents, and influenced policy at the highest levels. But they've also maintained focus on individual change. They funded a program providing free therapy for children who witness discrimination, recognizing that trauma doesn't require physical violence to leave lasting scars. They've supported legal aid for victims who can't afford to fight back. They've created scholarships for students of color pursuing careers in aviation, ensuring the industry becomes more diverse at every level. The academic study of Flight 447 has produced dozens of doctoral dissertations. Sociologists examine how bystander intervention played out in a confined space. Psychologists analyze the trauma and recovery of witnesses. Legal scholars debate the jurisdictional complexities of crimes in international airspace. Business professors teach the Meridian response as a masterclass in crisis management and ethical leadership. But beyond the academic analysis, the human story continues to resonate. Every day, somewhere in the world, someone faces discrimination. And increasingly, someone else speaks up. Someone records. Someone refuses to let it slide. The passengers of Flight 447 prove that ordinary people can create extraordinary change simply by refusing to be silent witnesses to injustice. As this story comes to a close, it's worth reflecting on what really changed that night. It wasn't just that a racist flight attendant was caught and punished. It wasn't just that an airline implemented better policies. It was that a 6-year-old boy watching his mother be assaulted became part of a generation that won't tolerate discrimination. It was that dozens of passengers discovered they had the power to demand justice. It was that millions of viewers around the world were forced to confront their own biases. Clara Morrison thought she was disciplining a difficult passenger. She ended up catalyzing a global movement. Amora Williams thought she was just trying to get a blanket for her cold son. She ended up becoming a symbol of dignity in the face of discrimination. Marcus Williams thought his world was ending when someone hurt his mommy. He ended up learning that good people will stand up for what's right. And Richard Williams? He learned that all the money and power in the world mean nothing if you don't use them to protect the vulnerable and pursue justice. His response to the crisis, swift, comprehensive, and uncompromising, set a new standard for corporate responsibility in the face of discrimination. The legacy of Flight 447 isn't measured in lawsuits or policy changes, though those matter. It's measured in the countless acts of courage by people who now speak up when they see discrimination. It's in the flight attendants who intervene when colleagues show bias. It's in the passengers who document injustice. It's in the children who learn that standing up for others is what heroes do. As we end this story, remember, discrimination thrives in silence and darkness. It withers when exposed to light and confronted with courage. Every one of us has the power to be the person who speaks up, who records, who refuses to let injustice pass unchallenged. We all have the power to ensure that no mother is ever slapped for asking for a blanket, that no child watches their parent be humiliated for the color of their skin, that no human being is treated as less than because of who they are. The passengers of Flight 447 showed us the way. The question now is, when you witness discrimination, will you be the person who looks away, or will you be the person who stands up and says, "That's not right"? Will you be the person who documents injustice, knowing that evidence can make the difference between accountability and another sweep under the rug? Will you be the person who comforts the victim, who tells the child watching that this isn't okay, that most people are good, that help is coming? The story of Flight 447 isn't really about Clara Morrison or even about Amora Williams. It's about all of us. It's about the choices we make when we think no one important is watching. It's about recognizing that everyone is important. Everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves respect. And sometimes, ensuring that requires nothing more than asking a simple question, "Would you like a blanket?" And meaning it for everyone, equally, without prejudice or presumption. The flight that changed everything wasn't just a flight. It was a mirror held up to society, showing us who we are and who we could be. The reflection wasn't always pretty, but it was necessary. Because only when we see clearly can we choose to be better. And that choice, to be better, to do better, to demand better, that's the real legacy of Row 23. That's the gift that Amora and Marcus Williams gave the world through their pain. That's the lesson Clara Morrison learned too late but now teaches others. That's the standard Richard Williams set for corporate leadership. That's the promise the passengers of Flight 447 made when they refused to remain silent: never again. Not on our watch. Not while we have voices to speak and phones to record and courage to stand. The story ends, but the movement continues. Every day, in airports and restaurants, in schools and hospitals, in boardrooms and break rooms, people remember Flight 447 and choose to be better. They choose justice over comfort. They choose courage over complicity. They choose to stand up rather than stand by. And that's how the world changes, one flight, one slap, one stand at a time. Until discrimination becomes so socially unacceptable, so swiftly punished, so thoroughly documented, that even the Clara Morrisons of the world think twice before acting on their prejudice. Until every child can board a plane knowing they and their parents will be treated with dignity. Until asking for a blanket is just asking for a blanket. Until Row 23 is just another row on an airplane, not a symbol of how far we've come and how far we still have to go. This is the story of Flight 447. This is the story of Row 23. This is the story of a slap that woke the world. But really, this is the story of us, all of us, and the world we're creating together, one act of courage at a time.